Hi, can you hear me? Yeah? So, good afternoon, and welcome to this event promoted by the Portuguese Institute for the Sea and Atmosphere. So, I'm so sorry. Okay, so I must welcome the Secretary of State for Maritime Affairs of Portugal, and also Professor Richard Spinar, which is the Undersecretary of the United States for Commerce and Oceans. And I welcome you all to this event, which is promoted by the Portuguese Institute for Sea and Atmosphere. Let's begin with some opening remarks by the Lydia Bulcão, which is the Secretary of State for Maritime Affairs. Please.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. In this Ocean Day at the COP, that happens to be also the World Fishing Day, it's a pleasure to welcome you here at the Ocean Pavilion at COP for this vital dialogue on the ocean as potential source of wind energy, hosted by IPMA, the Portuguese Institute for Sea and Atmosphere. As a country with a rich maritime heritage, Portugal recognizes the ocean's vast potential, not only as a natural treasure to be preserved, but also as a source of sustainable energy and resources that can propel us toward ambitious climate goals. The IPMA project, Technical Studies for Offshore Energy Potential, represents our efforts to build on scientific research, enabling us to responsibly and innovatively tap into offshore wind resources. This project is a clear example of how we can unite knowledge, innovation, and international collaboration to face the challenges that climate change and prepare the future for our blue economy. It involves the largest oceanographic campaign ever carried out on board of IPMA's Mario Rui vessel research, and represents an essential step towards the first geological and geophysical reconnaissance of the areas identified as potential for offshore wind energy exploration in Portugal maritime. I would like to acknowledge IPMA in the person of Professor Guerreiro and in the person also of Pedro Tenrinha and his team for their groundbreaking work, which exemplifies Portugal's forward-thinking approach to the blue economy and our firm commitment to climate resilience. The first campaign carried out on this summer was just the start of, we believe, will be a promising journey. It showcases Portugal's significant scientific and technological advancements in exploring the potential of renewable marine energies. This initiative will be crucial for building a robust offshore wind energy value chain, creating skilled jobs and reinforcing our energy independence, key elements for Portugal's sustainable future. Floating wind platforms, positioned further from shore and capable of harnessing stronger winds, are an essential piece of our national strategy and align seamlessly with the Paris Agreement goals and with UN Sustainable Development Goals 13 and 14, addressing both climate action and life below water. Portugal's journey in offshore wind capacity illustrates what is possible when ambitions meets expertise. Thanks to ongoing advancements in maritime technology and strong policy support, we are seeing a clear pathway to scale up ocean-friendly renewable energy solutions. Our approach, deeply rooted in scientific integrity and environmental responsibility, provides a roadmap for achieving economic growth without compromising the natural capital that future generations will depend on. Each of us has a role to play in fostering partnerships and crafting policies that attract investments to the innovative, sustainable, and scalable technologies that will bring ocean energy to its full potential. Let us seize this change to draw inspiration from each other and to work collectively toward realizing a blue economy that is not only sustainable, but also inclusive and resilient. The insights we share today will be instrumental in shaping the future of offshore renewable energy and in showcasing how the ocean, which defines us as a maritime nation, can lead us to a decarbonized future. So thank you for your attention. I look forward to the insightful presentations and discussions ahead.
Now we give the floor to Professor Richard Spinard, Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Administrator, to give its opening remarks, please.
Obrigado. Thank you. Madam Secretary, leadership, and colleagues from IPMA, it is an honor and a pleasure to be able to talk with you here today about our efforts in the United States associated with development of offshore wind. U.S. President Joe Biden set a rather ambitious goal when he came into office 4 years ago of responsibly deploying 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 while protecting biodiversity and promoting ocean co-use. That's a tall order. He also set a follow-up goal of deploying 15 gigawatts of floating offshore wind by 2035, which will be needed if the U.S. is going to effectively and efficiently exploit this renewable energy source. Over the last 4 years, the U.S. has built a pipeline of over 80 gigawatts of offshore wind projects sited along all 3 coasts of the continental United States. 10 projects already have received approvals for construction, with an 11th expected to receive approval before the end of this calendar year, totaling over 15 gigawatts worth of projects on the move from paper to reality. The first of these commercial-scale offshore wind projects connected to the grid in New York almost a year ago. We, and by we I mean the U.S. federal agencies like NOAA and the industry, have had to work and learn together to get the gears moving for offshore wind. Many times it felt like we were building the airplane while we were flying it. Though NOAA is not the lead agency for the siting or permitting of offshore wind, NOAA's science, research, and regulatory responsibilities enable sustainable, safe, and informed offshore wind development. In particular, NOAA plays critical roles in a number of areas. What I would call ocean intelligence, that's the mapping, the charting, the information about the contour and the topography and the makeup of the bottom, conservation of coastal and marine resources, research and operations, and of course, engagement with key stakeholders in states, tribes, and federal partners, as well as those impacted coastal communities and constituents. We have collectively taken an industry from 7 turbines to dozens, with many more on the way, and our relationship with our sister federal agencies have been paramount to that success. Across the U.S. federal government, we work to find solutions to not only build effective and efficient permitting processes, but also make sure they stand up to legal challenge. We've also addressed other concerns facing the sustainable and rapid deployment of offshore wind, like vessel availability, port infrastructure, workforce training, and of course, financial security. NOAA sits within the Department of Commerce in the United States, and our offshore wind-focused work happens alongside our sister bureaus like the International Trade Administration, which is supporting supply chain development, that is a critical and integral component of offshore wind development, and the Economic Development Administration, which has invested in workforce training. Now that we've built this multifaceted machine, we can work to fine-tune it and decide where it should go in the future. The interagency relationships that I alluded to, as well as the internal capacity driven by offshore wind, can also serve as a model, or be recalibrated for that matter, to serve other emerging ocean uses like marine carbon dioxide removal, as another example. We've experienced the benefit that a robust understanding of our marine environment, from seafloor geology to the air-sea interface, and all the biology in between, can bring to planning and deconfliction of offshore wind. Approximately only 26% of the global deep seabed is mapped. We've only had the resources to map about 52% of the U.S. EEZ as of January of this year. That means there's usually still a lot of mapping and surveying work to do once a lease is awarded to an offshore wind developer, and a lot of weight on the placement of each individual turbine to meet the project's engineering and energy outputs, but also to avoid unfriendly terrain, critical habitats, and other concerns. And in this regard, I specifically applaud Portugal for putting investments into these baseline studies and surveys that help better understand the ocean and make sustainable decisions for offshore wind energy development off its coast as early in the process as possible. These foundational data, along with the information about critical areas for national security, shipping, fisheries, cultural resources, and protected species, are now incorporated into models that help identify prime areas for offshore wind energy development. Marine spatial planning has emerged as an invaluable tool in plotting these data layers and ocean uses for consideration by our sister agency, the agency that does actually allow the final word. That's the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the lead decision maker, in fact, for offshore wind siting and leasing in the U.S. Through our experience, we've learned how important capacity building is between our agencies, as well as other key constituencies like the tribal nations and coastal communities must be engaged in the process from the start. NOAA Fisheries, the National Marine Fisheries Service, which leads the bulk of NOAA's regulatory responsibilities in offshore winds, has hired 100 new staff. We recognized we did not have the workforce to address this critical issue. So we hired 100 new staff to meet the growing regulatory and science demand across regions. We've also gained an appreciation that our work doesn't end at the approval of the project. NOAA continues to have responsibilities for monitoring, emergency response, and mitigation as projects move into operations, and eventually decommissioning too. That's got to be part of the full life cycle consideration. We've also worked to identify and mitigate impacts of offshore wind to its own assets and to its work. Offshore wind developments can impact NOAA's long-term fisheries and protected species surveys. These facilities are going into places where we have for decades, if not centuries, conducted surveys of marine life. It can also impede things like our high-frequency radars that we use for our weather forecasting, critical to doing things like measuring wave heights and winds and currents. It can also affect many other meteorological buoys and observational systems that we have. So there's a whole portfolio of collateral considerations that we have to take in mind. So we've worked to incorporate mitigation measures into project approvals, and we're continuing to work on larger mitigation measures and programs with our fellow federal agencies and industry partners. In closing, let me point out that the energy demands continue to rise in the United States. There remains strong renewable mandates from many coastal states, and support for the economic growth that offshore wind can provide remains strong among key sectors. I'll share with you in closing just a very quick story. 2 years ago, I was asked by President Biden to sit in a meeting, a small meeting, with some of the developers, some of our coastal governors, some of the regulators from federal agencies. And I was asked to provide one sentence in this meeting, not 5 minutes, one sentence to the group on our perspectives at NOAA. And my comment was that at NOAA, we support the development of this burgeoning economic sector in an environmentally sustainable manner. With that, I thank you for the opportunity to share these experiences, and I look forward to hearing more about Portuguese development. Obrigado. Thank you.
Thanking these opening remarks, we now invite our panelists to come to the stage. Now we will introduce to you Dr. Pedro Terrinha, Head of IPMA's Division of Marine Geology and Georesources, and Scientific Leader of IPMA's Project Technical Studies for Offshore Energy Potential, which will be presented to us now. Please.
Right now?
Yes, please.
Isto é para mudar os slides? Como é que é?
É para mudar os slides, é
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you a brief introduction of this project called Technical Studies for Offshore Energy Potential. I'll be speaking about sea floor geology and condition, something I have heard for the first time after Professor Spinner. Well, this project was funded by European Commission. It is a 42 million euros project, and well, the whole concept is following the policy, the public policy of Portugal, into trying or contributing to move from a more carbon energy era to a more green energy era based on clean energy. And so this is the map of Portugal, and in green we can see the continental shelf of Portugal, which is in the west coast of the Iberian Peninsula, the southwestmost part of Europe. And this continental shelf has some peculiarities I'll show you about in a minute, but it is a strong wind facing coast. And the wind comes from the west and from the northwest. It's more or less a continuous wind. And the peculiar thing about this shelf is the canyons we can see. Well, the canyons we can see that the valleys that cut from near coast to the abyssal plains, and this constitutes a problem that we must face and study in order to make the offshore wind farms. That's an example of a windmill, and the depth of which they will be going to be set is much deeper than for example, the North European shelves that have most of their wind farms in place at shallow depths, like about 50 meters, whilst the wind farms that are planned to Portugal will be from 55 to 500 meters, which is considerably deeper. Okay, this is just a slide showing that our coast, for those who understand the environmental conditions of ocean and geology and meteorology, this is a village of Portugal, and we can see that the waves are continuously banging onto the coast. This is because the wind is very active, is permanent, and that's also because we are presently at a high stand of the sea level, and and this is the present day condition. Whilst in the past we had on the left hand side of the screen, we can see that that is a consolidated dune, and this dune happens to be about 20,000 years only, which means that it was a dune that was the sand was blown from the offshore, from the onshore of the beaches when the sea level was 130 meters below its present day. So the wind has been blowing continuously. So this is a permanent source of energy in our case, in Portugal. Well, these are the areas on the left-hand side of the screen. These are the areas that are supposed to be the place to install the wind farms. And on the right-hand side of the screen, we can see in red lines the lines that were collected, were shot using multi-channel systems, seismic systems, very high resolution sub-bottom profilers, and as well as side scan sonar and multi-beam echo sounders. Well, the red lines, the distance between them is about 1 kilometer, and this was acquired in August this year, using our vessel Mário Ruivo, and this is an example of the complexity, of the very extremely high complexity of the shelf edge of Portugal, a place where some of the wind farms might be positioned. And so this is a work we have to carry out very thoroughly, and the acquisition parameters have to be of top quality, because wind farm deployment has to be, the engineering, sources have to be based on also on the nature of the seafloor. So we have to know what's the seafloor made of, and what's its geometry, and also the technical properties of the seafloor sediments and of the seafloor rocks. This is an extremely high resolution image of the sector of the previous one, and those little hills we see there, they are approximately 3 meters high, and so this is the resolution that we are working at present, from centimeter scale to meter scale. And this is the 2025 site survey plan. The area you see in light pink, in rose, it's full of lines. So the lines that are planned, the line spacing varies from only 150 meters to 300 meters, and so that's why we cannot see on that slide the lines separately. And so this will be a very heavy work to carry out, and the international tender was launched, was finished, and that company, Ocean Infinity, was the winner, and we are planning to carry out the 2025 lines and geotechnical surveys with this company, and we will use as subcontractors Portuguese companies and Portuguese state laboratories. So as Professor Spinjar said, we also face this challenge in an inclusive society, as an inclusive societal system, because we have to live all together. So this is a challenge we have to face. We have to know nature from its seafloor and underneath the seafloor, across the water column, across all the environmental parameters, and of course societal issues like fisheries will be involved and are being studied as we speak now, as we have a cruise occurring right now in Portugal on collecting data, or environmental data on the seafloor, on the quality of the seabed, on the quality of the seawater, and on the natural species that live there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro. Now let me introduce to you Dr. Ellie Blij Mondelian. I don't know if I spell it right. She has over 20 years of experience in the field of environment, social and governance sustainability, encompassing research, business development, scaling finance, as well as international business promotion. At Innovation Norway, Dr. Mondelian holds a portfolio of significant roles, including overseeing the Norwegian business delegation and pavilion at COP29, and she's now coordinating Innovation Norway's strategic accounts, managing a portfolio of Norway's largest multinational enterprises. She will be sharing with us the Norwegian perspective and assessment to the team. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for inviting Innovation Norway to this panel. And also a big thank you to putting deep sea wind energy on the agenda here at COP. I believe that Portugal and Norway has much in common when it comes to offshore wind. The potential, the maritime history, the challenges of deep sea, and the challenge of infrastructure development that is needed. I will say a few words about what we're doing in Norway to support the development of the offshore wind sector. What we have accomplished so far, not as much as the US, but we are getting slowly there where we want to be. And I will also say a few words about the challenges we face and how we see the way forward. But let me start by saying just a few words about Innovation Norway, which I suppose most of you do not know our organization. We are the Norwegian government instrument for value creation throughout Norway. And we're also the Norwegian Trade Promotion Organization. So basically, we support Norwegian companies from startup to scale up, through growth, and of course also entering new markets. We are also a large green bank with several assignments from the Norwegian government to support the green transition in Norway and financing both the industry investments as well as R&D. One of the selected industries focusing areas for Norway is the offshore wind. Because Norway has vast experience in the field of offshore energy that is compatible with the needs that we have within the offshore wind sector. 2/3 of the offshore energy installations in the world are designed by Norwegian companies. The competence and infrastructure built around our oil and gas exploration and production fits well with the technical needs and expertise that is needed to develop the deep sea offshore wind in harsh climate. This is exactly what Norway needs, but it's also exactly what Portugal is needing at the moment. Within the offshore wind industry, we are counting almost 1,000 Norwegian companies. They range from small niche world-class offshore expertise to large international systems operating with offshore projects across the globe. And I know that they are very eager to partner with Portuguese ecosystems and to support our ambitions with offshore energy exploration. The cold climate and the harsh environment the North Sea has driven Norwegian companies to develop most advanced offshore technologies and solutions. So the question is, so what have we been doing at home to develop this industry? Well, the Norwegian government has high ambitions for offshore wind, also at home in Norway. The aim is to award areas with potential of 30 gigawatt offshore wind by 2040. The Norwegian offshore wind policy is built around three main objectives. First is to, of course, increase the renewable energy production. Secondly, to support innovation and technology development. And thirdly, to support the industrial development, including increase of capacity in the supply chain. The first offshore wind auction was held in March 2024. It was a 1,500 megawatt bottom fixed wind park, about 140 kilometers outside the southern coast of Norway. We also have a test park that is operational for piloting new solutions and technology within floating wind. The offshore floating wind park, Hywind Tampen, is the largest in the world. It is nearly 100 megawatt, and it has 11 turbines operated by Equinor at the moment. So Hywind Tampen and Hywind Scotland are both based on testing that has been done in the Marine Energy Test Center outside of Norway. Now, what are some of the challenges we face? I think they might also be the same as you will be facing in Portugal. Innovation Norway have recently commissioned a study on what is needed to realize the potential in the North Sea basin offshore within the offshore wind energy. Now, North Sea basin is a highly attractive area for offshore wind, but the report also states that sustainable and sufficient port infrastructure in the North Sea is identified as a big bottleneck. Ports for installation, manufacturing, decommissioning, maintenance, and system for integration is needed. Norway's ports have some clear advantages. It has protected waters, natural deep water, and little to no difference in the tidal. However, many existing ports have limited space, often short quays, and they are already fully booked. They are busy. At the same time, we need to develop new ports. This takes 4 to 8 years. So this matter is for sure urgent. Another challenge is to drive down the cost. And the key to this is, of course, availability of large projects, looking at 400 megawatt and up for the floating offshore wind industry to be commercially viable. So what is the way forward? One, to develop infrastructure. Secondly, to develop the value chain. And thirdly, to develop the flow of projects. These all three will be key, I believe, for us to reach our goals within the climate targets that we have set. And what is very clear, we will not reach our goals if we work in silos. We believe that collaboration across industries and across nations will be key to our success. We believe in floating wind. We believe it will become commercially viable, but we need to work together. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. Obrigada. And I will invite to further dialogue between our countries and many more, I also hope, because the more the merrier to get to our solutions. Obrigada.
So I thank you very much for opening for us the window and allow us to see Norway's reality. And now I will invite Dr. Barry Hayes. He's Associate Professor in Power Systems and Engineering at University College Cork in Ireland and a funded investigator in the Murray Research Centre. Leads a research team at UCC focused on the grid integration of sustainable energy technologies and the operation and planning of future power systems, and also works with energy communities around Ireland, providing technical advice on development and grid connection of community-owned renewable energy projects. He will share with us today the status of offshore energy in Ireland and on related R&D in this area at the MRA Research Centre. Thank you.
It works. Thank you very much, Inej, for the introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. So over the next 7 minutes or so, I'm going to try and give you a very quick overview of the status and future plans for wind energy in Ireland. So this is what our Marine Institute like to call the real map of Ireland. So Ireland, it's not a big country, but our seabed territories are one of the largest in Europe, and as you can see here, our territorial waters extend quite a long way beyond our landmass. There's huge potential for offshore renewable development within these areas, especially as we move towards the future with floating devices in deeper water further offshore. Ireland is a windy place. So this map here, it shows you the average wind speeds in offshore locations around Europe. And as you can see here up in the sort of northwestern corner of Europe, in these bright green and yellow areas, we have average wind speeds of over 10 meters per second. So the energy yield from a wind farm depends on the average wind speed to the power of 3. So this means high energy yields and potentially very profitable projects. Another thing to consider in this is that the sea conditions on the west coast of Ireland versus the sea conditions on the east coast of Ireland are two very different things. What this map shows is what we call the offshore accessibility. So we say that the seas are accessible if wave heights are below 2 meters and if wind speeds are less than 15 meters per second. We can get boats out to do construction and maintenance on offshore wind farms. And what this is showing here is that off the east coast of Ireland, it's accessible almost 100% of the time. Whereas once you go off the west coast, off the Atlantic coast of Ireland, it's a very different picture, especially as you start to get further offshore. The North Atlantic is a very tough environment to operate in, and survivability is an issue as well, as equipment could get damaged by storms coming in off the Atlantic. On the east coast, the seas are much calmer. We have quite shallow waters, so we can have fixed bottom wind farms. We already have one offshore wind farm off the east coast, and we're currently starting 3 more wind farms off the east coast, again, all fixed bottom. The next phase of offshore wind development will be off the south coast, and then the third phase planned so far will move towards floating devices on the west coast of the Atlantic coast of the country. Ireland has extremely ambitious targets for offshore wind energy. The target is 5 gigawatts by the early 2030s and moving to much higher values, 20 and over 30 gigawatts by 2050. We had a government auction last year for offshore renewable energy in Ireland, and it awarded 3.1 gigawatts in new offshore wind projects. The average price agreed for electricity generated from these projects was €86 per megawatt hour. And just for reference, the average wholesale electricity price in Ireland this month is around €110 per megawatt hour. So what this shows is that this is going to bring real value to the average Irish electricity consumer. It's going to drive down wholesale electricity prices on our market. It's going to drive down our carbon emissions, and it's going to improve our energy security, reduce our reliance on imported fossil fuels. Probably the biggest challenge that we have in all this is the electricity grid. So in Ireland we are an island grid, so our grid is not synchronised to the British grid, it's not synchronised to the much larger continental European grid. Electrically we're relatively isolated. We have a peak demand of about 6 gigawatts. Our electricity demand has been rising quite rapidly in Ireland, and the main reason for this is data centres. Ireland is the data centre capital of Europe. More than 20% of our total electricity demand is data centres, and that number continues to rise. We already have a lot of wind, almost all onshore, connected in Ireland. So we've around 6 gigawatts, and again that is increasing. And Ireland is already quite advanced in the grid integration of wind energy. We've one of the highest penetrations of wind energy of any country. The big challenge for us is that because we have an isolated grid with relatively limited interconnection, this brings real challenges for managing the variability due to wind and keeping a stable electricity grid, and those challenges are only set to get greater as we connect more and more offshore wind. So in our university, in our institute, we're researchers, so we look into the long term. We look at what should our energy system look like right into the future. So as I mentioned, there's huge potential long term for development of offshore renewable energy in Ireland. But as you saw from the last slide, we only have 6 or 7 gigawatts peak demand. So at some point, we won't be able to use all the energy generated from these wind farms. We'll be able to export some over subsea cables, but not enough. So at some point, we're going to have to do something else with all of this energy. Possibly that will be hydrogen and our hydrogen derivatives. We're just kicking off a European project next month where we're going to look at the concept of energy islands, so energy hubs that integrate offshore wind energy and onshore grids and these facilities for production of hydrogen and electrofuels. And what we're trying to move towards is, rather than just the way most wind farms are today, they're point-to-point connections from the wind farm to the onshore substation. In the future, we're going to need to build flexible networks like we have on the onshore transmission system offshore. If we take this further again, there are a number of research projects that have looked at the concept of really long-distance interconnection across countries, across continents. And what this does is, this helps us to mitigate against the variability of wind and solar. The question people always ask is, so what happens when the wind doesn't blow? What happens when the sun doesn't shine? Well, if you interconnect over long enough distances, if you imagine, for example, if we could interconnect offshore wind in the Baltic Sea with offshore wind in the North Sea, with offshore wind in the Atlantic area, we could interconnect that with hydro in the Nordics, we could interconnect that with solar in the south of Europe, even in North Africa. It's always going to be windy or sunny somewhere, so we mitigate against that variability. There are even research projects that are looking at the concept of a global grid, so transatlantic or transcontinental electricity connections. And again, this benefits from the different time zones that get interconnected together. The last thing I wanted to mention is just some of the research and some of the facilities that we have at our university. At the moment, we're doing a lot of research and development and a lot of commercial testing for floating offshore wind devices. If anyone's interested in this or any of the other research topics that I discussed, please do come and talk to me after this. I think that's all I have time for. So all that's left to say is Gorv Wahagwev, which means thank you in Irish, or I probably should say obrigado.
So I would like to thank you for all this overview around the Irish energy sector. And now I will introduce to you Dr. Tânia Mandinga. She's the Angola's National Director for Sea Affairs and Blue Economy. Dr. Mandinga has assumed leadership and management functions in various bodies since 2010, as in the Departments of Fisheries, Protection of Fishery Resources, Protection of Marine Protected Areas, and Management of the Fishing Fleet, always associated with maritime affairs. Dr. Mandinga is here today to share with us her work and that has been developed in Angola, their ambition on the use of renewable energies in the framework of the National Strategy for the Sea in Angola, the major challenges and assessment on how to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I will talk now about the National Strategy for the Sea in Angola and the Marine Special Planning. So we have the National Strategy for the Sea in Angola. and serves the overarching director guiding the sustainable management. It was approved in 2022. For vision, we remarks that promote the increase on social welfare, employment, and national welfare, enhancing the blue economy and framework of sustainable development based on scientific knowledge. And the film Angola has a maritime reference in the geopolitical framework. We have 7 strategic objectives, 72 specific objectives. We have the goals, action, and measures. About marine spatial planning, it can promote the health oceans and preserve the sustainable marine space that benefit its users. Consider the socio-economic use and the ecological function of the ocean. For marine spatial planning, we identify 5 general objectives. It starts for management aim, research objectives, stakeholder engagement, benefit sharing objective, conservation objective. Regarding for conservation objective, in Angola identify 7 IPSAS cases, the ecological and biological significant marine areas. So we here have the coastline of Angola. We have 1,650 kilometers and divided by 4. The area 1 is include the 2 main provinces in the north, like Cabinda and Zaire. The area 2 include other 2 provinces, like Bengo and Luanda. We call it the north center. And then another one, we include the other 2 provinces, Kwanza Sul and Benguela. We call it the south center, and the last one is Namibia province. Here we show the maps of fishes and environment and conservation we have in Angola. As you can see, the map shows the point of the oil extraction and the gas in the north. The red one is mentioned, so show the IPSAS that I mentioned, it was identified, and the activity of fishers, artisanal fishers, and semi-industrial and industrial fishing. Regarding the blue economy, we identify 6 components for blue economy in Angola. One of them is this fisher and agriculture. Another one is transportation and operation port and naval, mining and oil and gas, tourism, renewable energy, and government. We don't have, Angola does not produce marine wind power yet, but we have currently electricity from other source, like biomass, wind, hydro, and solar. Here I showed some of projects that we have in Benguela and Lunda North. Other solar generation in Saurimo, Quito, and Bailundo that we have. When you implement this kind of source of energy, the fuel consumption development is reduced. So one of the most promising opportunity for Angola blue economies lies in developing offshore wind energy, and we think that is improved to developing the wind eolic energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. And now I will invite our last panelist, Dr. David Isaac. He's President and CEO of the WDusk Energy Group, an indigenous-owned firm whose mission is to strengthen community development initiatives in Canada, focused on assisting Native communities to become self-reliant through renewable energy empowerment with a systems-based, community-driven approach. He was a co-founder of the First Nation Renewable Energy Collective in North America, and he is here with us today to share his perspective on the need to engage, co-design, and partner all projects that use ocean space with local and native communities, local fisheries, and aquaculture. Thank you.
Obrigado. I had to take that from you, sorry. So, yeah, I guess my name's, first of all, David Isaac, and I should note I'm not actually a doctor, though. My grandmother really wanted me to be one, but I didn't actually make it as a doctor, but I'm pleased to be in such esteemed company. So yeah, I'm coming today from, I'm actually a bit of a last minute addition, but I'm actually a Mi'kmaq from Eastern Canada, but I grew up in Western Canada. So I've been on both coasts and really have an appreciation for Indigenous community development from a real maritime perspective as well. If you look at most First Nations Indigenous communities in North America or the Americas, they're quite often beside a large body of water naturally for obvious reasons. And my people in particular were very well-known ocean maritime peoples, salmon people as well. Anyways, that aside, I just wanted to say that the work we do, and it goes back now about 15, 20 years, some of the first wind project that I was involved in, and this was an onshore wind project, but when I first saw a spinning turbine, it really struck me. It really, it was an epiphany type moment as a young person, and I literally fell in love with this technology, and it was my first love. I'm more into solar these days because it's more universally applicable to Indigenous and remote communities, but it really is a beautiful thing when you can harness an invisible force and power communities and power homes, and it really is a marriage of art and science, and we have to remember the aesthetic of it. I think it's important to think of the built environment and the impact that modern technologies bring to our landscapes, and in particular in Indigenous communities where, let's be honest, the infrastructure is rather subpar, and it really, I think, inspires youth and communities when you see this spinning huge piece of technology. So, and to that end, I also just want to note, maybe from my pretend doctor career, is the difference between medicine and poison is dosage. And so too for wind, and so too for solar, and for hydrokinetic, and any type of energy. I think there's really a balance, and we do have to keep that in mind. I'm always impressed when I drive through Brittany and northern France. They have these nice, tight little 10 megawatt onshore wind projects throughout the coast, and I think that's a nice number. On that note, where I am in Canada, there's some progressive, finally some progressive utility and policy framework coming into play, where Indigenous communities, or power purchase agreements, I should say, are offered up now with an incentive for developers to offer equity to that community. And so when we're talking about community participation, I'm not talking about having community engagement sessions and pizzas at the gyms and recreation centers. We're talking about actual equity, and that's why we need to really fast track green finance for not only developing nations but Indigenous communities in places like the Americas, where right now it's structurally prohibited for First Nations in Canada and the US to receive the Green Climate Fund, which is, in my opinion, something that should be addressed here at these talks. So I'd be remiss to not mention that. One of the issues, of course, is that 10 to 15% IRR, as we all know. And when you're looking for an IRR that's very tight, thinking about social development and thinking about bottom line, it's very difficult. And maybe if we get philanthropy involved, we can lower that IRR requirement threshold to 12%. But we still need to really be more realistic about the role of finance and how communities can not only participate but actually own these projects. And I think that's where wind energy, in particular offshore, can really excel and not just be a let's get this into the portfolio. This has to be a democratic, democratizing effort. I think renewable energy is particularly power purchase agreements and EPAs. These are the gifts that keep on giving to communities. You can imagine a remote community in, whether it's a small town in Portugal or a small town in Canada. Really, if the wind blows, the table is set. And these are 25 to 30-year terms. And so these are really things you can bank on and build equity. And I think from a community development and a social development perspective, it's absolutely insane. We're not coupling power purchase agreements or carving out more standards for renewable energy in communities. So, and I think there's mechanisms out there, there's models out there that we can build on. Anyway, so one of the things in Canada right now is we have some world-class wind. We've got some crazy meters per second averages, but it's just not enough in Canada, in my perspective. I do think because of some of the issues around electricity utilities and their lack of willingness in Canada to participate in more wind, I think green hydrogen represents a very exciting opportunity or alternative fuel source for wind projects. And we're seeing that in the Atlantic Canada. We've got 5 gigawatts proposed in the Atlantic from one developer alone. And these are also, I should mention, Mi'kmaq or tribally owned equity projects. So I think really that is the model, and it's proving to be the model when it's a community owned project, not just private. So I think it's a technology that's really in resonance, not only with community and social building, but also from my Indigenous worldview perspective and philosophy. It's very simple, the Indigenous worldview. It's everything is connected, and you should try to harmonize with Mother Earth, with Mother Nature. And I think in days like this and energy scarcity, it makes even more sense. So anyways, in Canada, there's about 318 wind farms, about 5% of the national grid. But there's almost 40 onshore and offshore wind projects planned in the next 10 years. So that's about $16 billion worth of projects. Not that significant, but I would say Atlantic Canada, Newfoundland, New Brunswick, these are real hotbeds, and I think places that we can learn a lot from what you guys are doing and also use your expertise, in particular on the hydrogen front. But yeah, so one other thing we saw, so going back to my first project, actually, it was 15 years ago. It's called the Nikoon Wind Energy Project, and it was an offshore project in the Hecate Strait in northwest BC, or British Columbia, the west coast of Canada. And this was a very cutting-edge project at the time. It hasn't proven successful, but I do think we've seen waves of interest come and go over the years. It is similar to the Irish description you mentioned, shallow waters, a good base, and just crazy winds where they, from a sailing terminology, where it'll blow the dogs off the chains. It's very, very unforgiving. But that project is sort of where I really gained my first experience and saw the potential for First Nations to become owners. Unfortunately, I think the developers at the time didn't really include the communities as much as they wanted, and they would have had more license and probably made it over the line if they did. I think it's also another good example of where you can maybe use islands or offshore wind project is to double as a electric cable, subsea cable, and you can connect mainland to islands as well. And also throw in fiber optic while you're there. Anyways, I know it's been a long day, and I don't want to take up too much time, but I don't want to be too long-winded about wind energy. But I maybe leave it at that, but just wanted to emphasize the real need to look at wind energy and offshore wind, not only from a technical, innovative perspective, but from a community development, financing, innovation perspective. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for such an interesting and different sharing of your experience in Canada. I would like to thank you all, indeed, all these panelists for your interventions. And we'll now have some time for an open debate, which will have to be very short because we're running out of time. But if you do have any interesting question that you want to forward to our panelists, so please do do signal. And okay, I don't know who was first. So maybe.
Hi, thank you for the talk. And my question builds off of some of what Mr. Isaac was saying. With offshore wind energy, and it's hard to gauge with some of the estimates of how far offshore they were, but you could imagine disruptions to local economies. And so in the projects that you have been involved in, have you run into that, and how do you navigate working with local populations to not disrupt that, hopefully, or navigate that situation?
Okay. I don't know, maybe Ellie or Barry? I don't know.
I'll maybe attempt an answer and then pass on to others. So at least in Ireland, in terms of the sites for offshore wind, we set up a new government body, a new government planning body for specifically for offshore energy. And so that has decided, it's looked at shipping routes, it's looked at, fishing, it's looked at the seabed surveys and so on, and it pre-identifies sites, and then private developers can come in and bid on one or more of those sites, and then you have an open auction, and you kind of pick. But the actual siting is decided by the government. Private developers then they do a lot of community engagement work, and that's very important because there is a lot of public opposition. There's massive public opposition in Ireland to onshore wind, but even we're finding with offshore wind as well. Even when they're quite far out to sea, there's still a lot of public opposition. I'm being told to wrap it up here. So does anyone else like to add some quick comments? No.
Okay.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have run out of time. We don't have any more time for more questions. So with this, I will really want to thank all the participants, not only the inspiring words by Dr. Lydia Bilcão and Professor Richard Spinrad, but also our brilliant panelists. So if you want to join me with a big round of applause, I will thank you all for this.